Snow clung to the bare branches outside the window, the kind that didn't melt right away, just stayed heavy like sorrow. Inside the one-room cabin, 12-year-old Lila sat cross-legged on the braided rug, pretending to read a book while watching her mama try not to cry. Martha Bell had gotten quieter these past months after her husband, Jonas, didn't come back from the cattle drive. Folks said it was bandits. Some said it was the storm. Either way, he was gone. No body, no funeral. Just silence, like the wind had stolen his name. Since then, the nights had changed. Martha still cooked, cleaned, brushed Lila's hair, and read Bible verses in the morning. But after dark, something different came over her. Lila would lie awake and hear it. That quiet weeping behind the stove, thinking Lila was asleep. They lived far outside the town of Glen Hollow, a half-day ride from the main road, past the broken fences and snow-drifted hills. Their horses had been sold after the second month without Jonas. The barn leaned like an old man too tired to stand, and half the roof was missing. Martha tried to patch it with old oilcloth and scraps from flour sacks, but the wind didn't care. Lila knew what hunger was now, not just for food, though there wasn't much of that either. Hunger for sound, for warmth, for her mama's old laugh. The way she used to hum while kneading dough. All was gone. That morning, Lila walked out to the edge of their land, a warm wool shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. The snow creaked under her boots. In the distance, she saw smoke curling up from the next ridge. She knew who lived there, Elias Wright, the carpenter with the slow way of speaking and the hard eyes. He wasn't young, maybe 40, maybe more. No wife. Folks said he buried her back in 75, then stopped talking to anybody but his dog. But Lila had seen him once, kneeling in the dirt behind his house, fixing a bent fence post. He'd looked up and given her the smallest nod. Not warm, not cold, just seeing her. That was enough to stick in her mind. Back inside the cabin, her mama stirred the fire and added another stick. Her hands were red and cracked from the cold. "Mama," Lila said quiet-like. Martha looked up, startled. "What is it, baby? You ever think about asking someone for help?" Her mama froze, then forced a smile. "Ain't no one out here got enough for themselves, let alone for us." Lila nodded, but her throat felt tight. That night, she stayed awake again, listening. The soft, breathless sobbing started just after the fire burned low. Lila turned to the wall, eyes wide open, heart aching with a kind of helplessness that felt too big for someone her size. She knew then she couldn't let it go on. The next morning, while Martha was outside checking the trap line for rabbits, Lila took a scrap of paper and the stub of a pencil. Her handwriting was crooked, letters big and spaced out. She didn't know what all to say, but the words came anyway. "Sir, please marry my widowed mama. She cries at night when she thinks I can't see." She folded the note tight and tucked it inside her coat. After dinner, while Martha dozed off by the fire, Lila snuck out and walked to Elias Wright's place. It was near dark. Her legs were numb by the time she reached the gate. His dog barked once. Elias came to the door, lantern in hand. He didn't say anything, just looked at her. She walked up and held out the note with both hands, fingers shaking. "Don't got to read it now," she mumbled. He stared at her a long moment, then took the note. She turned and ran back home, snow flying behind her. That night, Martha noticed the flush in Lila's cheeks, asked if she'd been outside. Lila shook her head, but something had changed. Inside her chest, where the sadness usually lived, there was now a little piece of hope. Not the kind that makes everything better. The kind that burns low and steady like coals under ash. The next few days, nothing happened. Martha sewed by the window, darning socks they barely wore. Lila did her chores and waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for, just that maybe someone had read her words and maybe they'd care. Then one morning, they heard a knock. Not many people knocked way out here. Martha froze, eyes wide. She opened the door slow. Elias Wright stood there, hat in his hand, his coat thick with snow. "Morning, ma'am," he said, voice rough. Martha didn't know what to say. She looked past him, as if more answers might be coming up the hill. "I got a note," Elias said. Lila stood behind her mama, barely breathing. Martha blinked, confused. "A note." Elias cleared his throat. "From your daughter." Martha turned, stunned. "Lila." Lila swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, Mama. I didn't know what else to do. You ain't been sleeping, and we got no horse, no meat, no." Martha's face twisted, and she reached out, pulling Lila close. She didn't cry, not then. Just held her. Elias looked down at his boots. "Didn't come to make trouble. Just figured. Maybe you'd let me fix the barn. It's fouling." Martha looked up slowly. "We can't pay you." Didn't ask for payment. She didn't answer right away. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. Elias crossed the threshold, snow melting off his boots onto the worn wooden floor. The air between them shifted like something too heavy had just been set down. Lila watched, hope fluttering in her chest like a bird testing its wings. It wasn't marriage. Not yet. But maybe it was a start. Maybe someone had finally seen them. The wind carried a hush over the hills as Elias returned the next morning with a sack of nails, a hammer, and 3 pieces of salvaged timber tied across the back of his mule. He said nothing as he set to work on the barn roof, his breaths turning white in the cold air. Lila stood nearby, watching him balance carefully along the rafters. Her mama kept glancing through the window every few minutes, torn between suspicion and something else she wouldn't admit to. Trust didn't come easy anymore. Elias had been a fixture in Glen Hollow long before Lila was born. Folks didn't know much about him except that he kept to himself and never asked favors. He built furniture in the old grist mill and traded hand-carved chairs for sacks of grain. Some whispered he'd lost a son during the fever that swept through 5 winters back, but Elias never spoke of it. He didn't go to church, didn't drink at the saloon, didn't gather for town meetings. But he was steady, and in a place where so many men disappeared or drank their kindness dry. That meant something. By the 3rd day, the barn roof held solid. Elias had reworked the joists, cleared out the rotted hay, and even hammered up a new door from scrapwood. When Martha brought him warm cornbread and a jar of apple butter, quiet thanks, he only nodded and sat on a tree stump, eating slow like the world wasn't going anywhere. Mama used to sing when she baked, Lila said once when she brought him water. She ain't done that in a long while. Elias didn't look up, but his jaw tightened just slightly. "Do you miss your wife?" she asked him suddenly. He set down the tin cup. "Every day." Lila sat on the dirt with her arms around her knees. "I miss my daddy, but not just him. I miss how Mama used to be when he was alive. Like there was more air in the house." He gave her a look then, one filled with that quiet weight grown-ups carried, the kind that didn't need words. Not long after, word got out in town that Elias Wright was spending his days at the Bell homestead. Some folks didn't like it. Some were just curious. The first to come poking was Loretta Tinsley, the preacher's wife. She showed up with a half-hearted basket of preserves and thinly veiled questions. "Just wanted to be neighborly, Martha," she chirped, her eyes flicking toward the barn where Elias's coat hung over a nail. "Heard tell you've had company." Martha kept her shoulders tight. "Just someone fixing a roof." Loretta pursed her lips. "Well, I do hope you're keeping propriety in mind. A widow's reputation is as fragile as spun sugar." Martha thanked her and shut the door faster than politeness allowed. Afterward, she stood stiff at the sink, hands trembling as she rinsed dishes they hadn't used. Lila hated how that woman made her mama shrink. Later, when Elias returned from the woods with chopped kindling, Martha met him outside. "You're not owed this," she said, voice low. He studied her, his face unreadable. "Didn't come to collect." "But people talk. They've always talked, Martha, whether you give him reason or not." Her chest rose and fell. She looked down, fists clenched. "I'm tired of being watched, judged. I didn't choose to be alone." "No," he said quietly. "You didn't." She didn't invite him in that night, but she didn't stop him from coming back the next day either. As the days passed, Lila began to see something small shifting between them. Not romance, Not yet. But shared understanding. The way her mama would pass Elias a cup without asking if he wanted one. The way Elias would check the windows before he left, making sure they were latched tight. He never overstayed. He never asked questions, but he kept showing up. Then came Thomas Brink. He'd been a friend of Jonas's once, back when things were good. Ran cattle up north, but never stayed in one place long. He arrived one frosted morning, slick with charm and smelling like pipe smoke and leather. Rode a fine horse and smiled too big. "Well, ain't you a sight, Martha?" he drawled. "Heard about Jonas. I came soon as I could." Martha was polite but guarded. Lila didn't trust him from the first minute. There was something too smooth about the way he patted her head, too loud in the way he laughed like he already belonged. He stayed the night, uninvited but unrefused, and filled the house with stories and bold talk. He hinted at opportunities, said he could take Martha and Lila back with him to Kansas, where there were warm houses and people who didn't forget about widows. Elias arrived the next morning to find Brink smoking on the porch. The two men stared at each other like wolves from opposite dens. Brink smiled thin. "You must be the handyman." Elias's jaw flexed. "Just making sure the roof don't cave in." "Well," Brink said, knocking ash off his sleeve, "when a man's away, it's easy for others to step in, isn't it?" Martha came out just then, breaking the tension. "Elias, I'll be out in a moment." "Thank you." But that night, Lila heard them arguing in low, hushed voices. Brink said things about Elias, called him strange, untrustworthy. Said people whispered about him being soft in the head since losing his family. Said Martha needed a real man to take care of things, not some quiet ghost haunting their yard. Martha didn't answer for a long time. Then she said one thing. "You were Jonas's friend, and you never came until now." Brink left in the morning, but he didn't go far. He lingered in town, asking questions. One evening, Lila saw him talking to Loretta Tinsley near the Mercantile. Both of them glanced her way and smiled too kindly. Things started to shift again. Folks stopped waving as quick. When Martha went to buy flour, Mrs. Dobson made a show of counting every coin. There was a feeling in the air now, a smell of smoke before fire. But through it all, Elias stayed. He fixed the front step, repaired the hinges on the barn door, built a wood box for Lila so she didn't have to carry logs so far. When he was around, Martha's eyes softened, even if just a little. Sometimes, late in the afternoon, they would sit on the porch and talk quietly, their voices carrying only when the wind turned. And Lila, she watched it all with hope swelling inside her, even as the snow thickened and the sky grew heavy with something she couldn't name. Maybe, just maybe, the pieces of their broken world were beginning to shift into place again. But hope, like fire, needed tending. And somewhere not far off, trouble had started gathering drywood. The days began to stretch longer as February passed into March, though the snow still came down in fits, swirling like torn cloth over the frozen fields. Inside the Bell cabin, something had changed. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't sudden, but it was there. Elias no longer knocked every time he arrived. Martha no longer looked away when their eyes met. And Lila, for the first time in what felt like years, laughed, just once sharp and clear as a bell, when Elias fumbled a log and nearly dropped it on his boot. "You got slow hands for a carpenter," she teased, grinning wide. Elias, kneeling by the stove, glanced up. "Reckon they're better with nails than kindling." That small moment lit something in the room, something that hadn't been there since before Jonas rode off and never came back. It was in these quiet routines that they began to find their footing. Elias taught Lila how to sand wood properly, how to run a hand along the grain and listen to where it wanted to split. He showed her how to read the sky before a storm and where to set rabbit traps so the scent wouldn't carry. Martha started tending to the garden plot again, even though the soil was still hard with frost. She dug anyway, wearing Jonas's old gloves, and Elias worked beside her without comment. There were moments that felt almost like a family again, like the broken pieces were slowly turning toward one another. But even in the warmth of those small victories, fear lived beneath the surface. One evening, after Lila had gone to bed, Martha stayed up with Elias by the fire. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy with things unsaid. "You don't have to keep coming back," she said quietly, staring into the flames. "I know, you've done more than enough. I know." She glanced at him then, something fierce and frightened in her expression. "So why do you?" Elias leaned forward, his voice low. "Because you don't look over your shoulder when I'm near. Because that girl of yours doesn't flinch when someone speaks too loud. Because this house isn't quiet the way a grave is quiet. I don't know why I do it, Martha. I just know it feels like breathing." Her eyes welled, but she blinked fast and looked away. "I'm still in mourning. I'm not asking anything of you," he said gently. "Not a thing." But she knew better. She could feel the question in the air every time he stepped near. A question neither of them was brave enough to speak yet. Then came the letter. It arrived on a gray afternoon with the stage driver, folded and sealed with the stamp of a judge. Martha stood in the kitchen reading it, her face gone pale. "What is it?" Lila asked. "It's from Jonas's cousin, from Missouri." Lila waited, heart racing. "He's filing a claim for guardianship," Martha said, her voice breaking. "He says a widow alone can't raise a child proper. He wants to take you, Lila. Says it's what Jonas would have wanted." "No, Mama, he can't. He's a lawyer, baby. He's got paper and words. I only got you." The fire crackled loudly. Elias stood by the door, quiet and still. But his eyes were fixed on Martha with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "Can he do that?" she whispered. Elias nodded once. "If a judge believes it's in the child's best interest." Martha shook her head, trembling. "She's all I have left." "You're not alone," Elias said, his voice low but firm. But the threat was real now, no longer distant. Someone with power was watching, waiting for the chance to take what little remained. From that day, every small act became a battle. Martha braided Lila's hair tighter in the mornings, like knots might keep her close. She scrubbed the cabin clean, patched the curtains, cooked meals with trembling hands. Everything had to look right, proper, proof that she was enough. Elias helped as best he could, but there were walls he didn't yet know how to climb. One night, he brought a cedar box he'd carved with his wife, something he hadn't touched in years. Inside were papers, land deeds, birth certificates, and an old wedding band. "If you need to prove something to a court," he said, voice shaking just slightly, "marriage still counts for something." Martha stared at the ring. "Don't ask me that." "I'm not," he replied. "I'm giving you the choice." But it wasn't just fear that held her back. It was guilt. Love, if that's what this was becoming, felt like betrayal. Jonas had died, trying to provide. She still wore his coat when she chopped wood, still whispered his name when the wind howled. Elias never pushed. He stayed, though, always. And then came the fire. It started in the old stable at the edge of their land. By the time they saw the smoke, the roof had collapsed, flames licking through the dry timbers like teeth. Elias ran toward it without hesitation, throwing buckets of snow and beating at the blaze with a wet blanket. Martha followed, barefoot in the snow, screaming for Lila to stay back. They saved the chicken coop, but the rest was gone. By dawn, the stable was nothing but blackened beams. Sheriff Holloway rode out the next morning, followed by Thomas Brink. The sheriff claimed it was lightning, though no one heard thunder. Brink just watched with narrowed eyes and two casual shrugs. "Awful thing," he said, chewing on a toothpick. "Real shame how accidents happen out here." Elias stepped close. "Was it an accident?" Brink's smile didn't touch his eyes. "Who's to say?" Later, after the sheriff left, Lila overheard Elias tell her mother that someone had soaked the barn door in lamp oil. "They're trying to scare you," he said, "trying to make you look unfit." "Brink," Martha said through gritted teeth. "He wants her gone so he can swoop in, control everything." Elias reached for her hand, then stopped himself. "We can't wait anymore." Martha looked at him, eyes full of fear and something else, something softer. "It's not that I don't care for you, Elias. It said I care too much to make a promise I might not be able to keep. I'm not asking you to promise, he said. Just let me stand beside you when they try to take her. It was Lila who decided for them. That night, as the stars came out in a sky wiped clean by smoke, she walked out onto the porch and stood in front of Elias. Do you love my mama? She asked plainly. He didn't answer right away, just knelt in front of her so their eyes were level. I do, then marry her. He gave a small, sad smile. It's not that simple. Yes, it is, Lila whispered, because I don't want to leave. And she won't say it, but she needs you. She cries less when you're here. Elias swallowed hard. I won't ever hurt her. Then help her. Inside, Martha had heard every word. She stepped out into the cold, barefoot again, her arms wrapped tight around herself. You're not the man I expected to raise my daughter, she said, voice breaking. But you're the man I hoped still existed. Elias looked up, eyes full of pain and something close to relief. And you're not the woman I thought I'd ever love again. She stepped toward him, took his hand, and for the first time, didn't let go. They married 2 days later, quiet and without fuss. The preacher came to the cabin. No white dress, no flowers, just two broken people choosing to fight for something whole. But nothing was finished yet. The cousin in Missouri wasn't going to give up. Brink still lingered in town like a snake waiting for someone to step too close. And the townsfolk, for all their nods and smiles, had already decided where they stood. What none of them counted on was how far Mother would go to keep her child, or how far a man who'd already lost everything would go to protect what he'd found. The quiet had passed. The fight was coming. And this time, they wouldn't face it alone. Spring didn't come with blossoms that year. It came with rain, cold, endless sheets of it that turned the dirt paths into trenches and soaked the edges of every roof in Glen Hollow. For weeks after the wedding, the Bell cabin felt like a house under siege. Not from gunmen or bandits, but from silence and waiting. Every knock on the door, every gust of wind through the chimney, felt like the start of something they couldn't stop. Elias began sleeping with his boots on. Martha kept a rifle loaded near the hearth. And Lila, for all her brave talk, stopped drawing pictures and started sleeping with her arm over her eyes like she couldn't bear to see the dark. The letter from the court came a week later. The hearing had been scheduled in Fort Hill. The cousin, Charles Bell, was requesting full guardianship of Lila on the grounds of maternal instability, unlawful marriage, and unsafe conditions for rearing child. Elias read it out loud at the kitchen table, the words scraping raw through the air. Martha's hands didn't shake. They didn't do anything at all. She just stared at the paper like it was a death sentence. They don't care about what's true, she said flatly. They care about what looks right. Elias folded the letter. Then we give them nothing to use. But it was already too late for that. Loretta Tinsley had been stirring the town like soup since the fire. She'd visited 3 different homes in 1 week, asking how folks felt about a widowed woman rushing into marriage with a man no one really knew. She said it all with the sweetness of honey, but it stuck to people's tongues just the same. Then the town schoolteacher, Miss Ellery, approached Martha in the general store. I'm sorry, she said quietly, but I've been asked to report on Lila's well-being. Her schooling, her conduct. It's part of the court inquiry. Martha stood frozen in front of the sugar sack. By who? Judge Kerr. He wants statements from anyone who's seen changes in Lila. Emotional instability, behavioral concerns. Her voice trailed off, shame tinting her cheeks. I told them she's doing well, but they'll still come ask. Martha walked home in a daze. That night, she sat on the porch with Elias and said, I feel like I'm living in someone else's skin, like I'm wearing clothes that don't belong to me anymore. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, I felt that way for a long time. After my boy died, after my wife took to the bottle and couldn't climb back out. She turned to him, surprised. He'd never spoken of them, not once. She left. Martha asked. Elias looked down at his hands. Not right away, but piece by piece she started disappearing. By the time her body left, her heart had been gone for months. I didn't know. I don't talk about it. They sat there in silence for a long time. The storm clouds rumbled in the distance, and the lantern on the porch flickered. That night, Lila had a nightmare. She screamed for her mother, trembling in bed, begging not to be taken. When Martha rushed in, she found Lila with her fists clenched so tight her nails cut her palms. She said, "I'm not yours," Lila sobbed. She said, "I belong to the government now." Martha didn't ask who. She just held her daughter close and rocked her until dawn. The days blurred into one another. Elias tried to shield them from the weight of it, brought home a puppy he'd found in a ditch, helped Lila build a bird feeder, fix the squeaky stairs. But fear doesn't disappear just because you don't look at it. It waits. 2 weeks before the hearing, Charles Bell arrived in Glen Hollow. He rode in with a black umbrella and a coat cleaner than anything this side of the county had seen. He was tall, with slick back hair and a voice that sounded like orders, even when he asked questions. He showed up at the cabin unannounced, standing on the porch like he already owned the land. "Mrs. Wright," he said with a smug tilt of his chin, "I came to see the conditions for myself. Court allows for that, you know. I'm within my rights." Elias stepped outside. "You've seen enough." Charles didn't flinch. "Ah, the carpenter. Or is it stepfather now? How fast you move in this part of the world." Martha's fingers clenched at her sides. "You're not taking her." Charles smiled. "It's not up to you anymore." He left a stack of papers on the porch, testimonies, depositions, character statements, all signed by people Martha had once thought were friends. People who'd waved from wagons and left bread on the porch when Jonas died. That night, Martha broke. She sat on the floor in front of the fireplace, sobbing like a storm had ripped through her chest. Elias sat beside her, arms around her, saying nothing, just holding on while the world collapsed around them again. "I did everything right," she wept. "I kept her fed, clothed, safe. I didn't lie, didn't steal, didn't drink. And it still wasn't enough." He held her tighter. "It's more than enough. They just don't want to see it. But what if they take her? What if I lose her?" He looked at her then, eyes fierce. "Then we fight until they break before we do." Lila, watching from the stairwell, didn't say a word. She just quietly walked into the room, climbed into her mother's lap, and whispered, "You already saved me, Mama. You don't have to prove it." That night was the turning point. The next morning, Elias rode into town, straight to Sheriff Holloway's office. He slammed down the burned stable's remains, a soak board soaked in kerosene smell, and demanded an investigation. "If you won't file a report," Elias said, "then I'll take it to Judge Kerr myself." The sheriff, half asleep and irritated, scoffed. "You got no proof." "I got motive," Elias replied. "I got testimony. And I've got a little girl waking up screaming because she thinks men in suits will drag her away." That shook the sheriff, if only a little. Back at home, Martha found her strength again. She wrote a letter to the judge, 5 pages long, explaining every detail of her life. The death of Jonas, the loss, the struggle, the silence she carried. She didn't ask for pity. She asked for the right to be her daughter's mother without having to earn it twice. "I don't know if words change anything," she said as she folded it, "but I can't stay quiet anymore." The next Sunday, she walked into church beside Elias. Every eye turned. Loretta Tinsley nearly fainted from the weight of her own frown. But Martha held her head high. She sang hymns without looking at the page, took communion with tears in her eyes. Let them see her, all of her, not the widow, not the broken woman, not the scandal, just a mother standing tall. In the final days before the hearing, everything tightened. Lila clung to Elias like a second shadow. Martha woke early and walked the fields, her face set in stone. Elias built a bench by the creek, carved with 2 birds and a small heart between them. When Martha asked what it was for, he said, "To remember what's worth staying for." Then the morning came. The 3 of them stood at the edge of the dirt path, the wagon hitched, dressed in clean but plain clothes. Elias helped Martha up. Lila climbed in without a word. The wind was sharp and carried the weight of everything they feared. As the cabin disappeared behind them, Lila whispered, "If I have to go, Mama, will you come with me?" Martha pulled her close. If you go, I go. But I won't let it happen. Elias looked ahead, hands gripping the reins like they were the only thing keeping him from unraveling. They'll try to tear us apart, he said. But we've already been through worse. And in that moment, bound by love, fear, and the weight of everything they'd carried, the little family rolled toward the courthouse. Not to plead, not to beg, but to show the world that love is not always loud or proper or easy. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's broken. But when it's real, it holds. The courthouse in Fort Hill wasn't built for comfort. It was built to remind people where power lived. Stone walls, tall columns, no color in the glass. Inside, the floors echoed every footstep like a warning. When Martha stepped through the doors with Lila's hand clutched in hers, she didn't feel brave. She felt like she was walking into a lion's mouth. But she kept walking because mothers don't stop just because they're afraid. Elias walked behind them, hat low over his eyes, his shoulders squared like he expected a fight. He didn't say much that morning. He just helped them out of the wagon, fixed Martha's shawl, and squeezed Lila's shoulder before they went inside. His silence was loud, steady, the kind of strength you don't have to ask for. They were asked to wait outside the courtroom for over an hour. During that time, Charles Bell walked past 3 separate times, each time slower, each time with a slight smirk on his lips. He had a fancy lawyer beside him and papers stacked under his arm like he already knew the outcome. When they were finally called in, the judge looked tired. Judge Kerr had the kind of face that sagged at the corners, a man who'd seen too many families argue over things that weren't theirs to begin with. But his eyes were sharp, and when he looked at Martha, he didn't blink. The hearing began formally. Charles's lawyer laid out the concerns, Martha's mental state after her husband's death, the suspicious circumstances of the barn fire, the quick marriage to a man with no known ties to the child. Every word was said politely, but underneath was poison. Lila sat beside Martha, gripping the edge of the bench so tight her knuckles turned white. Then it was Martha's turn. She stood up slowly, knees stiff from fear. Her voice shook at first. My name is Martha Wright. I was born Martha Dale. I married Jonas Bell when I was 19. We had a daughter, Lila. Jonas died in a storm last winter, and I've been fighting every day since to keep her safe. The judge asked about Elias, how long she'd known him, why she married so soon. I married him, she said simply, because he was kind, because he showed up when no one else did, because my daughter asked him to, and because I loved him. There was a silence in the courtroom, long and uncomfortable. Do you feel stable, Mrs. Wright? The judge asked. She looked him dead in the eye. No, she said. I feel broken most days. But I get up. I clean. I cook. I teach. I stay awake when she cries. I answer when she calls. I don't know if that makes me stable, but I know it makes me a mother. The judge looked down, scribbled something. Then he asked if anyone else wished to speak. Elias stood. He didn't take the stand. He just walked to the center and nodded once toward the judge. My name's Elias Wright. I lost a son in a fever, lost a wife to grief. I ain't here to win any medals. I'm here because a little girl climbed onto my lap and told me her mama cries at night when she thinks nobody hears. I'm here because I couldn't walk away after that. He paused, then added, I built them a roof. But it's not the kind of roof that matters. It's the one you build with your heart. The kind that keeps the wind off a child when the rest of the world walks by. There was a murmur in the room. Something had shifted. But then Charles Bell stood up, and with a practiced air, he laid down his final card. A letter from the town's doctor, stating concern over Martha's emotional well-being after the fire, that she may be suffering from episodes of hysteria and could pose a long-term risk of instability for a growing child. Martha's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked to the judge. That's not true. He never even examined me after. Did you refuse a visit from him? The judge asked. She froze. I didn't want visitors. I wasn't ready. And how many days passed between your husband's death and your new marriage? 41, she whispered. The courtroom seemed to inhale. Charles smiled slightly. No further comments, Your Honor. The judge called for a recess. Everyone cleared the room. Outside, Martha stumbled into the hallway like she'd been punched. I knew it, she said, voice hollow. They were always going to take her. Elias stood in front of her. No, not unless we let them. I didn't fight hard enough. You fought with everything you had. I still lost. No, he said again. Not yet. She looked at him, tears running hot down her cheeks. What else do I have, Elias? What more can I give them? And it was Lila who answered, quiet, clear from her small spot on the bench. You can tell them about Papa, she said. The truth. Martha froze. No, she said quickly. No, that's not. Maybe it's time, Alma, Lila whispered. Maybe that's what they need. Martha sat down slowly. Her hands trembled. Her voice cracked. When Jonas came back from the mine that winter, he wasn't the same. He was angry. Not at me, at life. At God. He drank. He shouted. Sometimes he punched walls. Sometimes he scared Lila so bad she hid in the hayloft. She looked at Elias now, voice barely above a breath. He never hit me, but he hit the walls, and the barn, and the horses. When the storm came that night, I begged him not to go out. He screamed that I wanted him dead. He rode anyway, and he never came back. Lila was crying quietly. Elias sat beside Martha, hand resting over hers. The courtroom was called back. Martha stood again, this time slower, steadier. I need to amend my statement, she said. I've left something out because I was ashamed, but I won't be ashamed anymore. She told the story again, of a man broken by hardship, of a marriage that turned into survival, of a fire that nearly took everything. She spoke not with bitterness, but with truth, the kind that costs something to say. I love my husband, but he was sick, and I stayed for my daughter. But I won't lie about who we were, and I won't let that lie be used to tear her away from me. The room was silent. Then Judge Kerr spoke. I've seen more custody cases than I can count, most of them full of lies, anger, and revenge. This one carries weight. Real grief. Real love. He turned to Charles Bell. You're a blood relative, but blood isn't everything. Then he turned to Martha. You've walked through fire and never stopped carrying her. I see no cause to remove this child from your care. Martha collapsed into tears. Lila wrapped her arms around her waist, sobbing. Elias let out a breath like he'd been holding it for weeks. They walked out of the courthouse, not triumphant, but whole. On the steps, Charles Bell passed them. He looked at Lila, then at Martha. And for the first time, his face showed something like doubt. Martha didn't speak to him. She just held her daughter's hand tighter. That night, back at the cabin, Elias built a fire. Lila curled up with the puppy on the floor. Martha walked out onto the porch, the cold air brushing her face like a reminder she was still alive. Elias followed her. You did it, he said quietly. No, she said. We did. They stood in silence for a while, watching the wind bend the trees. Then she turned to him and said, I want to be your wife. Not just on paper, not just for safety, for real. His voice was soft. You already are. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And in that moment, with no more lies between them, no more storms to brace for, the long road toward peace finally began. Spring came slower in Fort Hill than in other places, but when it arrived, it settled in like it planned to stay. The snow melted in fat, muddy streaks across the pasture, and tiny yellow flowers pushed up through the cold earth like stubborn hope. It had been 3 months since the courthouse. 3 months since Martha finally breathed without feeling hunted. And in those 3 months, everything had changed, but slowly, gently, the way a wound closes from the inside out. Lila had stopped flinching in her sleep. She still clutched her blanket too tight, still stirred when the wind howled at night, but her cries were fewer. She laughed more, talked in full, quick sentences again, the kind that tumbled over themselves in a rush to be heard. She spent mornings helping Elias mend fences and afternoons reading out loud to Martha while she cooked. She'd taken to calling Elias Papa without anyone asking her to. And Elias, for all his quiet strength had softened. He built a new cradle for the front room, not because they were expecting a baby, but because Martha said she might want one someday, and he liked the way her eyes looked when she said it. He carved Lila a little music box too, the kind with a turning pony inside, and didn't say a word when she cried after hearing it play. He just sat beside her and let her lean against his side. The land healed with them. The burned part of the barn was fully rebuilt now. The blackened boards were replaced with clean-cut pine. A new roof, a proper one, sloped high above the rafters. And hanging above the barn door, Martha had placed a small iron horseshoe. It had belonged to Jonas's first horse. She cleaned it herself, polished it until it shined, and then nailed it to the beam without ceremony. Not to honor the man he became, but to remember where they'd come from. That was her peace, not forgetting, but forgiving in a way that left room for breath. On Sundays, they still went to town, even if folks whispered less now. The stares had softened. Mrs. Tiller from the Mercantile even gave Lila a ribbon one morning, saying her braids looked strong, just like her mama's. And when the schoolteacher got sick one week, Martha was asked to teach the children for 3 days straight. She stood in front of the chalkboard with her hands sweating and her voice trembling, but she did it. And afterward, Lila brought her a wildflower and said, "You looked so brave, Mama, like one of the heroes in my books." One evening, near the end of April, they packed a basket and rode up to the edge of the ridge, where the land looked out over the valley below. Elias laid out the blanket while Lila chased a butterfly. Martha stood a moment at the edge, her eyes scanning the far-off hills where the mines used to be. The air smelled like pine and thawing soil. She turned back to Elias and reached in her coat pocket. "I've been meaning to give you this." It was a letter, folded and worn. Elias opened it carefully, read it once, then again. "It's my father's name," she said, "and where he might be." Elias looked up. "I want to find him," she said. "Not to ask for anything, just to tell him I'm still here, that I survived." Elias nodded. "Then we'll go." She didn't cry. She just smiled, slow and sure, like she'd finally taken a full breath. Lila ran back to them, laughing, arms out. "Come see the sky," she shouted. "It's pink like Mama's dress." They lay together on the blanket, watching the clouds turn gold and rose and violet as the sun dipped low. And there, under the open sky, Martha reached for Elias's hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. He turned toward her, brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "I never thought I'd have all this," he whispered. "But I do. Because of you." And she, eyes wide and open and steady, said, "Because of us." It wasn't a perfect ending. Nothing ever really is. There were still quiet nights when ghosts knocked softly at the back of her mind. Still days when the barn creaked a little too loud and she had to step outside to breathe. But there was no more shame in it. No more hiding from the truth. She had been broken, and then she had rebuilt. And in the end, that's what love looked like. Not grand gestures, not fiery passion, but standing still beside the same person day after day, saying, "I'm not going anywhere." Back at the cabin that night, Elias carried Lila inside, her head resting on his shoulder, her hair tangled with bits of grass and laughter. Martha followed with the empty basket, pausing at the door to look back one last time at the hills. They no longer looked like cages. They looked like home. And somewhere in the woods, a lone bird called out. Not a morning sound, but a song. Life would never be easy, but it would be theirs. And that finally was enough.